Alright, so it's the Italians up first here on episode 2. And they have interesting choice here. Of course, everybody picked their strategies. So they have a bit more of a guiding light where they're trying to go. So Tyrol is the only place they have any cubes on, and they actually still have all of their cubes because they haven't won anything. So they can unload if they would like. They don't care about signing the treaty, one way or another. Literally everyone else has interest in whether or not they sign the treaty, but they don't care. They do want to have lots of military, though, because they get 1 point per military that they have at the end. So they want to keep their happiness above this right here, because then they have to get rid of some of their military. So they want to keep it high. So they don't want this to get resolved where they lose happiness, which the Americans don't really care which one it gets done by. It doesn't really matter to them. Obviously, the Italians want to actually win something because they want to get victory points. So they could just drop some cubes on there and take the lead if they wanted. Also, some of the ones up here are interesting. They really want that inter-allied debt to be forgiven because it gives them some factories, some of the industrial output, and it makes them happy. The populace happy, plus it gives them 3. So they kind of like that. And this one up here isn't as cool anymore, but it's kind of cool. It's definitely bad. They definitely don't want it to happen against them. So they could, extend to the Americans and say, look, as long as you resolve it, that Italy gets it, which will give it to a German containment, which still gets them the points. We won't mess with that. But that's non-binding. They can't make them do that. But we are going to go for these two here, and we do not want to. We are going to resolve that one as an Italy, which will give you a -1 to your happiness, and we do not want you messing with that. We'll give you this one, but don't touch that one. And in fact, in the future, we expect you to help us settle that issue if you get a chance to. Which is pretty steep, but not too bad. The Americans are definitely get the better end of the deal, so the Italians are kind of pitching them something. But they're willing to take that. They're not going to tie any strings to the inter-allied debt because the Americans aren't going to particularly like having it forgiven. And also, everyone's going to want it. The Italians and the French want it the most, but, So they're going to do 3, make it 4 on inter-allied debt, and 2 here. That sounds good. And nothing else? No, they're good. Okay, so now we'll go over to the British and Lloyd George. And George is thinking that they would like the labor reform. That one's cool. And they want military for sure, so they want their happiness to stay up, so that's good for them. They also want the Empire flag, which they already have one of, but they're not available, and also any of the naval markers, which they are not available. So they could just let it lie and recover some stuff. Or they could deploy some troops to the Middle East to keep the Italians from forcing an issue to be unsettled, which isn't a bad idea. I think the French and the Americans would like for them to do that. So they'll think about that. But otherwise, the Americans don't want to do this for anything besides that. So they can probably leave that one alone. The inter-allied debt is kind of a So I think that they're going to, they could resolve one of these on behalf of somebody else, because the British don't particularly want the French to get the Rhineland. They don't want them to get another 6. So they could resolve the Rhineland for the Americans, and then the Americans could resolve Tyrol. And they could bundle this all up into one and bring down like inter-allied debt and say, we'll resolve Rhineland if you resolve, something else. But I think that they would rather let the Americans make that decision. And so the British themselves, there's really not many good options out here for the British, which kind of makes them want to go in for this one, but they're not gonna. They're gonna drop 3 here, and everything's getting a little bit expensive because a lot of cubes are out. So you know what we're gonna do instead? We're only gonna put 2 there, and we're gonna put 4 here. This is a big 5. Keeps the Americans possibly from getting something. But they don't want to piss the Italians off because they want them to sign the treaty. So it'll go over to the Americans now and President Wilson. And he could resolve any number of these. Now that this one is contested, it probably makes the most sense to do this one. Oh, by the way, the British were going to place a military, and they're going to place it here to help keep things down in the Middle East. That will knock this down by 2, because that's what it says up there. So they have to reduce their happiness by 2. They get to recover 3 from here, which is useful. And they get the bonus for any unrest rolls and bidding that happens on unsettled issues. So the British and the Italians kind of going head to head in the Middle East. So now back to the Americans. The thing that makes the most sense for them really is to go ahead and resolve the Rhineland. They could cut a deal with somebody else to do, resolve Tyrol for the British, and the British will, do something else in exchange. But I think this is the best option for them. So all of theirs go to the exhausted. The French go half, 1 into the box, 1 back, and they're going to resolve this. So now the Americans don't want to piss off the Italians because they want them to sign the treaty. Do they really want to piss off the French? If they did, they would just not increase the unrest in Europe, which is nice. Whereas if they leave it French occupied, then they will bump it up by 1, which is still within the area that it's not going to do too much. I think they're actually going to resolve it as the top one. They're going to do that because they don't want to lose this issue until some more. They don't want to have European unrest go up until some more issues are coming out, until some more European issues, and they're on the lead. So they're going to do it off of this one. The only problem is they will get a industry marker on it, which benefits the Italians and the French. But, they'll survive. It's not the end of the world. Those 6 victory points are better than that. And so the French will go down in happiness by 3. 1, 2, 3. And they put that marker on there, so they are good. That can't go down anymore. It can never go past the farthest left column. So that one is done. Anything else to do with that? Nope. Okay, so now they're going to resolve this. The Americans can optionally add 2 unrest to the Pacific. They don't really see the point, so they're not gonna. And then they get to pick one of these issues. And they are okay helping out the Italians and bringing this down, because they agreed, non-conditional, non-binding, that they would be okay with them resolving this with the Americans losing a happiness because they got whatever else. out of all of this. Or maybe something along those lines. So they're going to bring that one down. Also because none of the other ones are that interesting, so it's not that big of a deal. Unsettle a league issue. They don't want to do that yet, but that's a good option eventually. And then they're going to bring down this one. Bella Kun, because that allows an uprising check in the Balkans, which isn't a big deal now. So that's kind of like going to go through without much of a shtick. So now they're going to draw two and decide between these. So Ethiopia, the Italians would really like this one. They, and this is incorrect, by the way. That's supposed to be unhappiness, but no biggie. So they really, the Italians would really like this. And this would also make the Italians happy and keep their happiness up. So this is an option. And then German trade. This one isn't great. It doesn't really do much. It doesn't help the Americans for sure. So they're going to put Ethiopia on the table. Get an Africa issue out there, which is, it's an interesting one. This goes in the discard pile, and they'll flip over this. So it's Henry Cabot Lodge, uprising check, +1 to the die roll. So we'll do, I actually think that we were supposed to, I think, no, I guess not. I'll double check, but I didn't know if we were supposed to reset this track like you do at the end, but since it didn't work. But I think it said stop. So anyways, we're going to do another one in Africa. We can roll a die, but I don't think it'll matter because there are no Africa issues still. So let me double check that. Yeah, so the uprising check ends, so we don't reset the powder keg or anything like that. So we don't do the rest of it. So that will end the American turn possibly because they're also thinking about adding a military piece over to Europe. And I think they will. They're going to drop it in here, which will make them lose 2 happiness, but they'll regain 3 cubes. So 2 happiness, 3 cubes. And they have that military position there because they do not want to lose the Rhineland because it's a big 6 event pointer. So they're going to try and hold on to that and use the military to stabilize that region just in case, at least until some other issues get resolved. Okay, so now the French, Clemenceau sees this and feels a bit gypped because it was looking good earlier, and then pretty much everyone turned against him, and his happiness is in the tank comparatively because thanks to the French keeping the Rhineland with Germany. So now they have to figure out what looks good for them. These are both good for them, assuming now labor reform actually could be kind of interesting because you could resolve it as not for the happiness and resolve it for the industry as well, or otherwise. But that inter-allied debt is very interesting because it has 2 industry markers. Now the thing about those markers is that it counts regardless of who's controls it. So if let's say the Italians win that, and there are 2 industry. Even if the Italians have it, those 2 industries still count for the French. So they don't really want to drop 5 cubes over there because the Italians are going to do the same thing that the French would do. So instead, the French are going to drop 4 on labor reform because they might actually decide not to do the happiness. And then they have to do another one. And they could just forego all of this and get their cubes back, which I actually think is a better idea. There's not really any, they can hop on that later. It's still in the waiting room. So instead, I don't know if I've done this yet, but you can recover from here up to 6 influence, which that's 5, all of your exhausted military and any deployed military. There aren't any exhausted military, and they don't have any deployed military, so they're just going to go with that. And they're not going to deploy any military They could, but they're going to wait and kind of pan things out. So now the Italians, back to Vittorio Orlando, and he has 3 cards with his influence on it. So they could resolve this one, which is easy. That will leave this for the British, who will, I'm sure, resolve that. Is it that big of a deal if they do that? They're probably going to do it for the bottom one because they want the Italians to sign the treaty, which will give the Americans a point. It'll move up tension in Europe, which isn't great. But that could unsettle one of these issues, whether it's the Rhineland or whether it's Tyrol, and the Italians could possibly take advantage. So I'm thinking this we leave for the British under the condition that they resolve it as Italy, which I don't think the British have a problem with. They're kind of working together with the other two to keep their happiness up because they don't really care. Now, it may look later on that the French are, these two guys, the Italians and the British and the Americans are ahead, and so they may try and conspire with the French to get their happiness down. And it may just happen naturally. We'll have to see. But they're going to go ahead and resolve this, which they will take these and go to the exhausted, and they will resolve it as Italy, which will give them an empire marker, which is a point. It'll move the Balkans unrest up 1 and the American happiness down by 1. So Americans down by 1, Balkans unrest up, and we'll take an Italian empire marker and drop it down here. So this is just the beginning here of this move for the Italians. They have to do the rest of this. So an uprising check in the Balkans. They will not do one because there is not the opportunity to do one. So this just goes away. They're then going to pick inter-allied debt to bring down, another European issue, along with one of these, unsettle a league issue, or each player ending with you moves a deployed military unit to exhausted. So everyone's military pieces would go away that are out there. So that's kind of unfortunate. What they could do is they could take this down here and then deploy a military, another one to the Middle East, because that far column there on the end, there is no penalty for that one. So they could just drop another one in the Middle East, or they could put it anywhere for that. They could put it in the Balkans, or, the Balkans probably isn't a bad idea, but they can put it there, and that way they're kind of safe from this event card, because this one, I think everyone kind of wants to stay there and see who wins that labor reform league issue. So they'll bring that one down. Now they have to decide if they want this one. That doesn't seem too interesting. So they're going to pick up 2, which we have Southwest Africa, which is going to be more for the Americans and the British. Not very interesting. And then they have Syria, which is more British and French. And none of these... oh, well, that's not true, because these empire markers, any of them count for the Italians. So actually, this one probably gives them the best opportunity to get one of those, because these don't help them. So I think they're going to do this one. Drop Syria in there. It's just so funny that, I shouldn't say funny, but just so interesting to play this game. And, you put out a card, and you're like, oh yeah, we'll put out Syria. Oh yeah, we'll put out Palestine. We'll put out Constantinople, Ethiopia, whatever the card is, Rhineland. And you just think about it and you say, oh, well, what happened historically? And almost all of these, you can immediately find things that lead all the way to today that have been affected by what happened at this treaty signing. The decisions that were made here, just so influential to literally what's going on now. Had it just not happened at all, or had it turned out a different way, what would the world around us look like? It's very, very different. So it's just fascinating to think about the impact that the war and then the treaty that followed it had on the rest of the world, which we kind of got to look at when we did the Paths of Glory. But anyways, we've done everything minus flipping this and doing this. Each player loses 1 happiness per deployed military. So this is good this came up now and not later. So everybody loses 1 minus the French. So the Americans will lose 1, and then the British and the Italians will lose 1. And now their turn is done unless they want to add one of these, which they do. And they don't really care where it goes, but they're going to put it in the Balkans. Now they could modify the roll by 2 if they put it here, but they're not going to do that, I don't think. They could get extra bids. So that's kind of tempting, but it's probably going to go away before anything happens. I'm almost positive it will, so it really doesn't matter. And they can only put out 1, right? Yeah, adding another one there is actually a good idea. They're actually going to put it here so somebody else doesn't do it, now that they've all kind of realized that that's kind of a good idea. If that does come up, that's going to give somebody a lot of influence over taking that unsettled event. Okay, so now the British, they could resolve the Tyrol issue, which they kind of like. 5 points. Nothing else really sticks out. So they will resolve it. So all 4 of these to the exhausted. Italians half. Americans half, rounding down. So that's 1. And then the British, they could, now see, doing this one gives the Americans a point and pushes up unrest, which could mean that this card would become unsettled, possibly. They could do this one, which pushes the Italian happiness down, which is not great because they want to keep Italian happiness up. But also, I'm not sure. It is worth more to have the Italians sign the treaty than it is to give the Americans 1 point. Plus, this may keep the Americans from trying to take it, possibly, if it becomes unsettled, even though not really. It's just that this, makes it more likely. Deploying a military to Europe is a good idea either way, because it is, helps them with their goal and possibly getting another card. So they're going to resolve it as the bottom one here, where it goes to Italy. So we'll get one of these German containment markers. And European unrest goes up by 2. And to finish off their move, the British are going to deploy, because they see this Henry Cabot Lodge card down here as well. So they're going to deploy down here because they'll probably remove it. And then maybe next turn they'll deploy another one further up that track. But as of right now, they're just going to keep there on the end so they don't face any repercussions. I should not do that yet because we have to finish this. So I'll just keep that off for now. But let's finish this first. Because the reason that's important, because you're about to do this. Each player ending with you removes 1 to the exhausted. So ending with this, with the British, the Americans, to here. The French don't have 1. The Italians, they don't want to remove this one because if they place it back, they lose that again. And the British have to remove this one. So only the Italians are left. Now would be a good time for unrest in the Middle East, for the Italians at least. There's a lot of rhyming. So now The British can bring one down. Labor reform is interesting, though I can almost promise you that it won't be controlled by them when it gets back around to them. I'm pretty sure the French are going to hop on that. But the French also want this one, and the French want that one. Doing this one makes the Italians less happy, but they also kept them from being less happy with the last card, so maybe they can make up for it with this one. Yeah, let's bring down... They're going to resolve this, so maybe that'll give them time to do this. They're going to bring down Ethiopia, because maybe the Italians are not going to focus on it. The French might take it from them, in which case that's there for them, but we're going to get to these eventually, I'm sure. So now one of these, uprising check in the Middle East, British not too into that. So they're going to bring down this one, especially not next turn before everyone's had opportunities to do stuff. So that down. Now, 2 issues. Southwest Africa is cool, so they're going to bring this one across. They like that one for that, for multiple reasons. And now lastly, flip a new card and check the crisis up. Uprising check +1. It's going to be Africa again, which once again there are no Africa cards resolved, so it doesn't really matter. What happens with the die roll. Okay, now the Americans with 2 cards up here. I mean, this one's good for them too, but I don't know that they want to fight for it. These 2 are better, especially, well, they're both about equally good. So I think they're going to place on those 3 each. Oh, did the British want to deploy? I think they did. I think they want to drop. Because Europe's tempting. And yeah, Europe is really tempting. Because it's... actually, the uprising check will do both. So let's just back everything up. So let's bring these off. And fix everything. So we're going to go back to this card here, which says uprising check. We do the one in Africa, which nothing happens, but we also do the one in Europe, and nobody can modify that roll because nobody has a military there. Now, it only happens on an exact roll of a 6, which has already happened once before, but if so, things get interesting. And it is a 2, so nothing. So it wasn't really that big of a deal. But the British, having seen that, are going to drop that there. Move their happiness down by 1. Recover 2 cubes. And that's a little bit better because now they have some sway over the roll in the middle, in Europe, because they don't want that to go away. So now to the Americans, who are going to do 3 and 3. They also are going to deploy. The question is to where. They're going to deploy behind the British, because in case of a tie, it's whoever is furthest this way, I believe. Yep, if tied, then whoever has the leftmost. So they're going to drop in behind there for no penalty. This way, the British, obviously it's not as good as being to the left of them, but if it does happen, then they don't have to pick the Rhineland. They'll pick Tyrol from the British. So that's not bad. Okay, now the French, Clemenceau. Nothing doing down here. Besides this, but this can go to the Italians because 5 on there. Yeah, I mean that's a lot. So the French really want that mandate in Syria. So you're gonna put 4 in Syria and 3 on labor reform because they're still thinking about doing that. So that'll do it for the French. Do they want to deploy anybody? They have not yet. And troops are not an important part of their strategy. So they do want to protect Constantinople. So they could do is place something on one side or the other, depending. They want to be able to influence that role. So they're going to put it there. The thing that stinks about this, move their happiness down by 2. The thing that's bad about this is that they don't have any cubes to recover. So part of that goes away. But part of it is also useful. And so they're good. And now the Italians, they're going to resolve this. All 4 to the influence, exhausted. And they're going to do it as this side here. So we will bump British up by 2. French up by 1. Italians up by 1. Americans down by 2. And then we'll get 2 industry markers, which also helps the Italians and the French, and drop those on here. So that's 6 points for the Italians, 9 points for the British, 9 points for the Americans, and 6 points for the French, not including any of the extra bonuses, just literally points on the cards, which is not bad. So we'll have to do this, unsettle a league issue. There is not a league issue to unsettle, so that goes away. The Italians have to decide between these and they kind of like this one. They're going to go with this one, and maybe because the French will win it. And if not, if everybody fights over it, it may get around to the Italians, where they can resolve. The French can put more on it, and then the Italians can resolve it. The French will probably go along with that. And now this is unsettle the reparations issue of your choice. We've not had a reparations issue, and this was an uprising Czech in the Middle East, and the Italians do want this, kind of, because they can influence the role, but as of right now, you don't even do one. So that is unfortunate, but they're going to take this one down instead. So now decide between these and this. None of the ones in the discard pile are interesting. So they can do this one, which has that Bolshevik containment, which nobody took. And then Smyrna, which is very interesting. A couple of people have interest in this, Middle East and everything. So they're going to go with this one, which gives the Italians a couple of things to fight over. That one's just very bland. And we'll do this here, which says remove 1 unrest from a random region. Random regions are determined by a die, which it listed on the side over there. And we roll a 3. The 3 would remove it from the Middle East, but it can't go any further because of that powder keg. So it does not happen. The Italians then are thinking about deploying to the Balkans another military. They also kind of want to do that in the Middle East. So they're also going to do the other one in the Middle East here. So now they have 2 there, and should the issue become unsettled, which is very possible, they will have the opportunity to bid both of those for a combined 4, which would really kind of throw the weight in their scale. The only problem is the Italians have 2 big fights coming up, Ethiopia and Smyrna. And a lot of their stuff is over here in the exhausted influence. So getting both of these is going to be difficult. But it's over to the British, and I'm going to take a break. All right, back with Lloyd George and the British. So they are going to, they considered labor reform and adding more influence to that. They also debated offering to settle it for the French, but instead they are going to divide up some influence among Ethiopia, which has a UK mandate, and Smyrna, which has a British naval marker on it, this is exactly what the Italians wanted to do, so they have direct competition with the British. And they're also going to do something pretty radical. They're going to take a military marker and they're going to drop it over here in the Middle East on the most furthest left, which is a -4 happiness and recover 3 cubes. So that's the most powerful one of them all, but also comes with that steep 4 penalty. Happiness 1, 2, 3, 4, because you just got out of this war, so 3 of these, and now you're deploying more troops. So unpopular move, but gives them a say in what's going on in the Middle East. If nobody else wins another Middle East issue, then it'll be the British, because the 3 of them have 1. The British have the furthest left marker, so have to be mindful of that. That'll do it for the British, and now the Americans. All right, so the Americans are going to pitch, President Wilson's going to pitch a good old-fashioned quid pro quo to the French. They are willing to resolve labor reform or settle labor reform with no strings attached. The French can make their decision between getting an industry marker or getting a happiness. They say that's completely up to you. They are going to bring down the Southwest Africa issue. All they ask in return from the French is that they resolve or settle, I'll get that right eventually, that they settle Southwest Africa, which the U.S. will do as independent. Now, naturally, they could bring down Syria, but the problem with Syria is that the French will just resolve it. And the other thing to think about is the flip side of this is they could bring down Syria and then the French might do it. The thing is that would give them 2 Middle East issues, which means if there is an uprising, they would have 2 6-point cards in the Middle East, of which everybody else has an interest in. So that kind of puts a target on their back, which there already is for that Constantinople card, but that would give them one of equal value, actually more valuable to overall the U.S. have an interest in Syria. So the U.S. would actually not mind Syria coming up, because let's see, is there any unrest? No. Yeah, there is. It goes up by 1. So the French aren't too gassed about that. It's probably a bad reference given World War I, but if the U.S. brought that one down instead, would the French resolve it? I mean, I guess they would. They wouldn't really love the idea of it because that would put them at risk. But the U.S. has got to get something out of it because they don't have any skin in the game. In the Middle East, all of the troops are non-American, so they would have very little sway over winning either Constantinople or Syria. So they're kind of going to back off of trying to spill Constantinople. They're also not going to help them get Syria, though. So the French, they give it a thought. In the end, it's a little bit better for the U.S. than it is for the French, but they're willing to take it. So now, of course, the other one's not binding. If the Southwest Africa comes down, they don't have to take it. But this, the U.S. also didn't attach strings to whatever they do here. So the U.S. will not make that a condition. And, these 3 go to be exhausted. Half of these. Hopefully you guys got an idea of how this all works now. And rounded down, this goes back to their pile of how all this works. So the French, the happiness is nice, but they have 2 more happiness than both of them. So keeping them kind of low gets them on the threat of having to demobilize, which, leaves the French in a better position. So they're going to not establish labor reform as part of the league. So they'll place this down here. They now have 10 points total. And they will get an industry marker, which they place for a point, which also helps the Italians out a little bit. So there you go. And so the U.S., to finish out all of this, they'll do this. There is no reparations issue to unsettle, so that doesn't happen. They choose one of these. They're going to bring down Southwest Africa. Choose one of these. They're going to bring down this one. Or they could bring down the Middle East one, because they don't really care now. I mean, they could always fight for it if it comes up, but they're going to not be in the best position, because if they take this, it really will do nothing. So they'll just leave it just to see, because chaos for everyone else isn't bad chaos. So now this one or this one, not very interesting. So now these Baltic states, Bolshevik containment. Look at that, double. U.S. really likes that. Even if they went a little softer, I mean, that's good. And then Kurdistan. The two other major powers have interest in that. So I think this one's a little bit better. Though, I imagine Kurdistan will probably get brought back up by somebody. Probably the French. And then lastly, we'll pull up this one. And it is an uprising check. So there are 2 opportunities for an uprising. One, let's pan over here. One in Europe and one in Africa. Now, normally you would do the one with, since it doesn't say where to do one at, you do one of them with the most unrest. If they're tied, so you do them both. And is there an Africa? Did anyone get an Africa issue yet? No. So the Africa one won't really matter. But the Europe one will, and it's interesting. So now they can both modify the die. Or no, they can't. Only one can. The British, because they're in these 3 columns here, they can modify the die plus or minus 1. I think they have to announce what they're going to do before they roll the die. So, are they interested in tossing up a European issue, possibly unsettling one? Now, let's take a look at the European issues that have been settled. So with the Italians, you have the inner allied debt. You know, nobody would really be opposed to that, to get that happiness boost. So that's wouldn't be bad. The British don't want to lose. They don't care too much, because if this one came back up, they wouldn't mind winning it and doing it on here, just to keep the U.S. from getting this point. They just don't want anyone else winning it because it's a 5-pointer. And then the U.S., they don't want to lose this one. Do the British really want it? Not really. Besides the fact that it's a 6. That's nice. But the U.S. and the British have a military unit there. So they both have a higher bidding capability than some of the other ones, though the U.S. has more available. Troops, they have 2. The French have 3 total. The Italians only 1. So it would be a bit of a slugfest. And they're kind of just okay with everything staying the way they are. So they would need a 6 or higher, so it could be a 6. If they add 1 to the die, then it is impossible to roll a 6 or higher. If they subtract 1 from the die, then if they roll a 6, then they'll roll a 5. So if they subtract 1, it won't happen. If they add 1, then all you would need is a 6 or a 5. So that in account, I think they're going to subtract 1 and just keep everything safe. So we won't even need to do a dice roll. Now, should another European event be won by somebody else, or a European issue, and then they know who's going to lose it and what issue is going to go up, then it may be different. But with the opportunity they could to lose their own, they don't really want to burn their own resources just defending. So they're going to subtract from the dice roll, which means it won't even happen. All right, so that's it for the Americans. Do they want to deploy anywhere? I don't think so. They're okay. So it'll pass to the French, and they are going to hold up the other end of the deal as far as getting Southwest Africa. The other part of it is if they can coax the Italians into resolving Syria for them. So the French have actually decided to back out. They don't particularly see the Southwest Africa deal being all that advantageous for them personally. So instead, they're going to resolve Ethiopia, which is interesting. So they're going to settle Ethiopia. Now, why? Because remember, they are doing isolationism, so they do not want the Italians signing the treaty. So unless the British are willing to lower their own happiness by 2, which that's a misprint, then they're going to be lowering the Italian happiness. Now, they're not going to take independent. But if they take this one, the way they look at it, we get to lower the Americans, and the Italian only goes down by 1. So we'll do this one. We'll do the UK mandate. So they'll add that to their list, along with a empire marker. And they'll adjust U.S. happiness by 1 and Italian happiness by 1. And those three, by the way, I accidentally put them in here. They need to go in there. So now the rest, the French get to decide. Exhaust to influence to reduce European unrest. They don't have any interest in that. And now the extra interesting part is they could bring down Syria and try and get the Italians to do that or wait for it to come back around to their turn. But I think more interesting is to do this and bring down Smyrna, which the British may let the Italians have. We'll have to see if they do. The French may step in and act in their own interests. Then the French will do this, probably. The worry is if you resolve this, that knocks the unrest down. Be at 5, and then all those people will get to fight. You know what, let's move it down. Because if somebody resolves that, it'll come from them, not from the French. Just to make things more interesting. By the way, the French do want to grab Kurdistan, as we said. Drop that down on there. Middle East, very hot. A lot of cards from the Middle East. Still nothing from the Pacific. And this. And it says uprising check +1 to the die roll. So we'll do it in Europe and in Africa. The one in Africa won't matter. They get a +1 to the die roll. And then the Americans don't get to decide, only the British. There's a +1. And there are 3 countries tied on 3 issues in Europe. There. And I think they're going to -1, so we'll be even. If it rolls a 6, then there is an uprising. Yeah, it's 4. So no uprising. And that'll do it for the French. The Italians now going to have to counter what's going on in Smyrna. Alright, now what to do about Smyrna? The Italians originally offered the British the opportunity to resolve it. They'll resolve it for the British if they'll do the top issue. They'll say bump up the Italian happiness. British, I mean, they like that, but they don't need to do that. They can wait. So they said they didn't really want to do that, and the Italians didn't really want to do that either. And they thought about putting 5 cubes down, kind of give ourselves a commanding lead. Then they thought about just resolving it for the British. Then they thought instead what they would do is just reclaim these pieces over here because they have a plan. They want to be well equipped. They get 6 plus any military. They want to be well equipped for what may come. What they are hoping happens is that the British resolve Smyrna because they will push up the unrest to the 4 column, and then this card over here will come into effect, which will cause an uprising check. And that would dislodge that event back. And then the Italians, of course, will be ready to pounce on it because they have all of their strengths in the Middle East and their influence cubes. So everybody else kind of has to measure that whether or not the British are going to kind of see that coming, or if they do see it coming and don't do that. We'll have to measure it all out. But that's the hope. It's just a matter of whether or not the British will not see it coming and then fall for it. So the British do see it coming, and they see the dilemma here. So they are going to themselves refuel for this battle. They're going to pick up all of their eligible things to remove from the exhausted box, which will count as their one move, and they're not going to do anything else. So that falls to the Americans now, who don't really have skin in this fight. They would like to see Italy sign the treaty, but they're not really willing to jump in on this issue just to possibly see the effects of it. And they also don't really have much skin in the game in the Middle East, which is a funny thing to say about the United States. So they don't really they see an opportunity here to expand on other fronts while the other three powers are tied up in the Middle East. Once again, an interesting thing to say about the United States. So they're going to claim Southwest Africa. It's not great, really. It's not one they typically, I imagine, would want to go for. I imagine the British would like this one a lot more. But they're going to resolve it as the independence. These go into the exhausted box. They pick this up, and they're going to do it here. So we will place this down here for the U.S. Give them a counter, and let me plug the camera in. All right, we're charging. So they're going to get this naval marker. Then they're going to do the rest of all of this, which may be a bit of a downer to everybody else. Resolve an unrest in the Middle East and the uprising check, which they can't do because it's in the X column, which doesn't allow that to happen. So now they got to pick one of these to come down. And they really like the Baltic states. They're hoping that the fighting over the Middle East will distract from this one, because it's not really good for anybody. The French kind of like it a little bit, but everybody else it's pretty useless for. So getting that one would be nice. And then of these two, we could reduce unrest in the Middle East, which isn't useful. And the player with the lowest happiness exhaust 6 influence. So they don't want that. But they will do that. So now they don't care about this. That isn't particularly good. So now they have Transylvania, which that's good. And then they have military intervention. And this one's not nearly as valuable, but that's good. This one lowers our unhappiness, but for that, the British are probably going to pick this one up out of the discard pile at some point. So let's leave this one out and put Transylvania into play, because that German containment would be very nice. Lastly, this event card, Uprising check, +1 to the die roll. So we're going to be going back to Africa, which actually there is a thing now, so let's hold off on that. We have to wait because they go in descending order. So Europe, +1 to the die roll. The British once again are going to subtract 1. So it'll be even. Whatever the roll is what the roll is. And it is a 5. So no unrest or uprising. And now for Africa, there are 2 Africa settled issues that could come up. So we roll. It's going to be a straight 6 because there are no troops. And looky there, a 6 it is. Fell down into the crack and landed perfectly on 6. So now you go off whoever has the most issues in that region. Well, the only 2 who have them, they don't have any, are these 2. And I know the glare is there, but that's Ethiopia. So they're tied. Then you would look at the board and see who has the leftmost military. Well, nobody has one on that track. I'm assuming it doesn't mean just in general on region track. If tied, player with most advanced military on region track picks. Okay, so there is no one there, so they will roll off to see who has to give up their issue. So the British roll a 5. It's a little high. The Americans roll a 3. So it'll be the British and Ethiopia that are going to bring up for this uprising that has unsettled the Ethiopia issue. So that will make for some fun. So the fight that they're having is not the fight that they thought they were going to be having. The Americans look at this and don't really see much, besides that they don't want the independent because the happiness there for the Italians. Honestly, they'd probably rather do this one just because the Italians are in last at the moment. Kind of. It's all relative given the bonuses. So they would prefer this one. But the owner will get to bid first. They can bid influence and military. Military in the region, on the region track, is worth 2 rather than 1. There are none, so they have their just 2 regular military and then all of their influence. So the problem is that we could still have an uprising in the Middle East, and what you don't want to do is exhaust everything, all of your resources, during this fight rather than holding it for another one. So the British don't want to just straight up lose this issue, but it is only a 3. And the flag, if it does go to the Italians, will help them out anyways. And I have to double check really quick just to make sure that I subtracted their 2 happiness, because if they didn't, they could be in trouble. So I went back and looked, and I did not subtract the 2 happiness for Southwest Africa right here. I haven't done it yet. I plugged the camera in. So this should be here. And that's important because this -2, should the Italians get it, would push them down into 10, which means that they would have to mutiny one of their forces, one of their military forces, which means that it'll be demobilized. But rather than going in the highest available box, which would get them 5 happiness, it goes down in the bottom box and only gets them 1. So it's just mutinies are not good. So now they actually do have something to fight about in this. They do not want that to happen. Now, they could, talk to somebody and say, hey, look, Italy, don't resolve it as this way, resolve it as something else. The French would like to resolve it as the bottom one because they don't want the Italians signing the treaty. Nobody else really has any interest in that happening. But the problem is that the British go first. So, if somebody passes, then they can't come back in. You can't wait and see what happens and then rebid. So you only get 1 shot at it. So the British are going to bite because they want to be sure that they don't get screwed. 1 military, 2 influence is the bid. So now it goes over to the Americans. And they trust the British interests here. They don't really care between the other two. They would kind of like to see the British have a mutiny, but if they don't, they're just not really willing to spend the stuff for it. So they're going to pass. They're out. The French would very much like to see the other option given. So they are going to commit 1 and 3. So what happens is everybody bids. That wants to. If you pass, you're out. You have to bid, and really the influence are just tiebreakers. You're really bidding military unless there's this little symbol right here says no military, which doesn't say that. So you have to bid more than the person before you, obviously. If you would bid 2 military, that's more than, but they're going to bid 1 and 3, which is more than 1 and 2. So, like I said, the influence are really just like tiebreakers. So the French are going to hop on that with that bid. Now the Italians can, look at the French and say, well, what are you going to resolve it as? And they say they're going to resolve it as the top. So now do the Italians even want to get in on this? I mean, they could just leave it to the French and say, yeah, we totally back you up in this. We're all for it. Because they don't care if they sign the treaty or not. That's not part of their strategy card. So they're cool. They're going to pass them. So now the British know that they do not have as many forces. They have more forces tied up in the Middle East and in Europe. And so if it gets down to the wire, the French can just take them over, can overtake them. So the British will drop a second one on there, which puts them in the lead. Just because if you do lose, you don't lose the things you bid. If you lose, it goes back to your available. So might as well go big or go. The French see this as a real opportunity to slide back that Italian marker, and the British, move back the British. Because the thing about it is, this moves it forward. They could do this, which would only move the British back 1. They could take either. They could move the British back and cause them to mutiny, or they could move the Italians back 2. So that's an interesting decision they'll have to make, but they would like to make that decision. So they're going to drop a second one on there. Now the French are back in front. So all the British can do now is offer up more influence, which they're going to do. And all the French they could continue to offer more influence, but the French instead are going to drop a third military. And then the British cannot respond. They do not have enough military to do anything about that. I will say the one thing is that you lose 1 happiness for each military you use, I believe. And I can look at... no, I don't think there's actually a card for that. Current owner, winning bid to exhausted. Yeah, it doesn't actually say. So anyways, but I'm pretty sure you lose 1 happiness for each one you use. So they'll actually lose 3 happiness, which they're going to have to decide what they want to do. They win, so the British will get everything back to their supply, available, whatever you want to call it. Whereas this will have to be spent by the French and exhausted. But let me double check on the unhappiness and let me think about what they're going to do as far as resolving this. So yes, each military unit you bid loses you a happiness. 3. And the French have decided to resolve this as the independent at the bottom. Reason for that is that deprives the British of a point, it deprives the Italians of a point, and more interestingly, pushes this down, which is for their strategy, pushes this down by 1. Now the reason for that is because the Americans are up next. The Americans just got done. This is the end of the American term. The French are up next, and they can they could settle this issue. And then the British have to make a tough choice because they want to do it as this one. But that will reduce their happiness and cause them to mutiny. So they don't want to do that. So then they'll have to probably choose this one, which gets them none of the benefits, just the 5 points. So, I mean, they don't have to do that. They could make the British make that choice and recover instead. So, I mean, they don't, there's options for sure. So, you know, it'll be up to, you know, possibly the Italians, possibly the British to decide that. So that's the only disadvantage to selecting this one, is that it'll definitely get selected by somebody at some point. But you could just force the British into a difficult situation and to give up a point that they would otherwise get, because it's definitely not worth the mutiny. Definitely not worth the mutiny. So it'll be the end of that and the end of the American turn, and it goes over to the French now. French gave it some thought, decided not to resolve that. Instead, they're going to get exactly the amount. There's 6, they can take up to 6. So they're going to take all 6 and all exhausted military. So they're going to empty out this box, because if that does get resolved, that Middle East issue, they could be in for a fight over an unsettled issue. So they would very much like to be able to be part of that fight, should it happen. And they could then, you know, deploy somewhere. They could deploy to Africa. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to do, whenever you get done with this bit here, the uprising, that's what it is. Make sure before you implement the option, whatever you do, make sure you increase the powder keg by 1 and then reset this to the left or to the right of the powder keg. Powder kegs can't go past the 3rd column. It's just a resetting thing. But make sure you do that before you do the stuff, because you can end up like changing this before and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that you're getting what you're supposed to be getting. Okay, so it's going to be the Italians as the active player, and I think I'm going to wrap it up for this video, see how long it is. Might do a little bit more, might just upload it. Given there's not really a turn structure, it's just kind of go. I can cut it up however I like. I'm trying to end it, you know, where the Italians go first, but kind of do what I like. So I think this will be it for this one. We can look at the points. The Italians have 6. The French are sitting on 13. The British on 9, and the Americans on 14. So it's very much still neck and neck, not including the bonuses and that sort of thing. So that'll do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed.